Getting the best Ryzen Motherboard 2025? It's confusing. Welcome back to PC Builder, I'm Jason. Now, whether you're building a budget gaming PC with a Ryzen 5600 or the ultimate gaming PC with a Ryzen 9800X 3D, there's so many different motherboard features, pricing is just all over the place, it's hard to even know which board you need. So we're going to break it all down and make specific product recommendations for the best Ryzen Motherboard 2025, Ryzen 5000, 7000, and 9000 series CPUs. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more cool PC content. Let's jump into it. Now, the most confusing part of buying the best Ryzen Motherboard 2025, it's understanding the different chipsets from B550 to X670, X870E to B850, B650, A620, it just keeps going. The first thing to focus on is the first number that comes after the letter. So for instance, focus on the 6 in the B650, as that tells you the generation of motherboard. Motherboards in the 500 series and older, so B550 motherboards for instance, are all on the AM4 socket, which supports Ryzen 5000 and earlier CPUs, which have the pins on the CPU itself. Motherboards in the 600 and 800 series, like the B650 and X870E, are on the new AM5 socket with the pins on the motherboard, and they support Ryzen 9000 and 7000 series CPUs and Ryzen 8000G APUs. So if you have a Ryzen 9000 or 7000 CPU, you'll need a 600 or 800 series motherboard, and for Ryzen 5000 CPUs, we recommend a 500 series motherboard. Be careful, as Intel motherboards have very similar sounding chipset names, so you'll want to double check you're getting the right one. Next, let's look at the first letter in the motherboard name. Now, most people watching this video will want to get a B series motherboard with a 50 in the name, like a B550, B650, or B850. As these motherboards usually have the best price to performance features. A-series motherboards aren't much cheaper than B-series boards and do not include support for AMD's auto overclocking feature called Precision Boost Overdrive, or PBO for short, which we generally want to enable in the BIOS for the best performance. Also, the new B840 motherboards are just A-series motherboards in disguise. The X series of boards are primarily aimed at high-end creators or production users who need a ton of M.2 SSD and USB connections. X series motherboards usually cost quite a bit more than B series motherboards, but they sometimes can be found on a deal. AMD also added an E to some of the B650, X670, and X870 motherboards in an attempt to specify that these motherboards have both PCIe Gen 5 GPU slots, as well as at least one PCIe Gen 5 M.2 NVMe SSD slot at the same time. But this is just not consistent. Some of the B850 motherboards have both as well, and they don't have an E. My advice is just to focus on getting the features that you want, and just consider the E boards in the same category as non-E boards. So B650 and B650E, it's just B650. There are some minor differences with X870 and X870E that we'll discuss when we recommend creator boards. So here's my chipset recommendations based on your CPU. For budget builds with a Ryzen 5600, 5600X, 5700X 3D, or other Ryzen 5000 series CPUs, you want a B550 motherboard to ensure that you get PCIe Gen 4, which is now required to get the most out of budget and mid-range GPUs. For Ryzen 7000 and 9000 series CPUs, if you're primarily a gamer, then a B650 or B850 motherboard, that's what you want, unless you see a deal on X670 or X870 motherboards. Now, professional workstation users or creators who need large amounts of M.2 NVMe SSDs or rear panel USB connections, look at X670 and X870 motherboards. We'll make recommendations for all of these motherboard categories. Do not skip this section. The BIOS flashback feature, now Gigabyte calls this QFlash Plus, it allows you to update the motherboard BIOS without a compatible CPU installed. Now, this is critical if your motherboard does not come with an updated BIOS that supports the CPU that you bought. And mostly this pertains to the AM5 motherboards with newer Ryzen 9000 series CPUs. Now, all the AM5 socket motherboards that I've seen, they have BIOS flashback. This ensures that no matter what motherboard and CPU combo you buy, you will be able to get the system to boot after updating the BIOS. Using BIOS flashback, it's super easy to do. We cover how to do this step by step in our How to Build a PC guide that's linked down in the video description. Mainstream motherboards come in 4 sizes, also called form factors: a full-size ATX form factor, a 2/3 size called a micro ATX or mATX for short, and a mini ITX motherboard intended for small form factor builds. Now, there's also an extended ATX or eATX motherboard, which is the same height as the ATX board, just a little wider. Now, most of you will likely want either a full-size ATX or a micro ATX motherboard, but we'll make mini ITX motherboard recommendations as well. Note that mini ITX motherboards tend to be quite a bit more expensive. Micro ATX motherboards usually have an M at the end of the chipset name, for instance B650M, and mini ITX boards have an I at the end of their chipset name, for instance B650I. Now make sure that your motherboard size fits in your case. Smaller boards fit in larger cases, but ATX boards are not going to fit in a micro ATX size case. All right, let's talk about PCIe Gen 5 M.2 NVMe SSDs, which are quite controversial. Gen 5 NVMe SSDs are twice as expensive per terabyte as PCIe Gen 3 and Gen 4 NVMe SSD drives, and they offer zero gaming benefit or other home use benefit. Even very few professionals see any tangible benefits using it in a PC build. Now, PCIe is backwards compatible, so you can use a Gen 3 or Gen 4 NVMe SSD in your Gen 5 motherboard M.2 slot. Just don't pay anything extra specifically to get that PCIe Gen 5 M.2 slot on your motherboard. Next up is the PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot. We now have the RTX 50 series, which are the first PCIe Gen 5 GPUs. But an RTX 5090 runs just fine on PCIe Gen 4 GPU slots, so you don't actually need a PCIe Gen 5 motherboard slot as PCIe is backwards compatible. So this remains an optional, possibly future-proofing feature for ultra high-end builders. I will say that PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot equipped motherboards have massively dropped down in price, and they now start around $180 in the US. So if you are considering two premium motherboards with similar features, but one has a PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot, maybe you grab that one just in case. Let's briefly touch on the VRMs. That's the power delivery in a half square around the CPU. Now, in years past, we found that some previous generations of motherboards wouldn't run the highest end CPUs without their VRMs overheating. However, this really hasn't been an issue with AM4 Ryzen motherboards or AM5 Ryzen motherboards. For gamers, any motherboard that we're gonna recommend, it's gonna be fine with a Ryzen 5 or 7 CPU, including the X3D ones, like the Ryzen 9800 X3D. For production users, using a Ryzen 9 CPU with 12 or 16 cores, you'll want a higher end motherboard with creator and production features anyway, so it's not going to be an issue. M.2 storage connections are a critical feature for most users. For AM5 motherboards, most budget to lower mid-range boards have at least 2 NVMe SSD slots, the mid-range to premium B series motherboards have 3, and X670 and X870 generally have 4, with some having 5. As we previously discussed, most of these slots can run up to Gen 4 speed, but some are rated for Gen 5 speed. Remember, you can buy a PCIe add-in card to get additional M.2 connections. Now, many motherboards come with built-in heat sinks for M.2 drives, so consider that before you buy an SSD with a pre-installed heat shield. In addition, most motherboards come with at least 4 SATA drive connections for your SATA SSDs and SATA hard drives. Let's talk about motherboard audio. Now, the audio section of the motherboard, it's in the bottom left-hand corner of the board, and it's made up of capacitors, shielding, and a Realtek audio codec chip. You use this audio anytime you plug in an analog device with a connector that looks like this, either into the rear panel audio connectors or the ones on the front panel of your PC case. Now, if instead you're plugging in a sound device with a digital connection like HDMI or USB, then you're going to bypass the onboard motherboard audio processing, and instead you'll be using the secondary device for digital to analog conversion. Budget audio codecs, they can sound fine, and they typically in the 800 series, such as the ALC897. More premium audio codecs have better overall signal to noise ratios and additional audio signal boost for your front panel headphones, like the ALC1200. The best audio codecs are the ALC1220 or the newer, but similar ALC4080, both of which offer additional encoding and decoding support, as well as support for high impedance headphones when using the front PC case audio plugs. Let's talk about those rear panel USB connections. That is probably the most important feature that users totally forget to consider when buying the best Ryzen motherboard in 2025. USB connections come in different speeds and physical types. For the rear I/O panel, most boards offer a range of USB-A connections at different speeds, from USB 2.0, those are usually the black USB connections, to USB 3.2 Gen 1, typically colored blue, to USB 3.2 Gen 2 connections, often colored red. There are also USB Type-C connectors, which are the smaller but faster connections. Most X870 motherboards also come with at least one USB Type-C port running at USB 4 speed, something that isn't necessarily that useful for most regular users. Motherboards also have headers to plug in the front PC case USB connections for both USB 3.2 and slower 2.0 ports, and some come with USB Type-C headers, particularly the newer 600 and 800 series motherboards. For network connectivity, your motherboard will come with wired Ethernet. Now, the older boards are generally 1 gigabit per second connections, while most of the newer 600 and 800 series boards come with at least 2.5 gigabit speed. Many now come with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, either built in or added in using an M.2 Wi-Fi key. Now you can always buy a USB M.2 or PCIe add-in card to get Wi-Fi and Bluetooth later. Let's jump into product recommendations for best Ryzen Motherboard 2025, which are all linked down in the video description. Check out those links for current pricing and availability in your region. Now we're going to continue to keep this list updated, including if new motherboard models are released, if pricing changes, or a board is discontinued, which does happen from time to time. Let's jump into the best motherboard for Ryzen 5600X, Ryzen 5700X3D, those older budget AM4 CPUs. What do you want here? Number one, do not overspend. Spend between $80, maybe $110. Number two, you want to make sure you get a B550 motherboard. You need PCIe Gen 4 for some of these new budget GPUs where they've cut down the GPU connector on them. And number three, I want to make sure that you get a reinforced GPU slot. It should have a nice slab of metal over it like that, not just in plastic, because these heavier GPUs these days will almost rip off that GPU slot if you're not careful. So make sure you get a reinforced one like this. Let's start off with the top picks. These rotate depending on what sales are going on, but let me give you three evergreen picks. The MSI B550M Pro VDH Wi-Fi. There's also the Pro VC Wi-Fi, essentially kind of the same board. $89 right now. That's usually what it goes for. Good VRMs, pretty good in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity on it. And it's got basic audio, but it does have Wi-Fi. That's 2 thumbs up there for $89. Another good pick, the ASRock B550M Pro 4. Now these are micro ATX boards so far, and this one has upgraded audio, big chunk and heat sink on it, so 2 thumbs up there. Slightly better VRMs on this board, and slightly better rear panel USB connectivity for $99. If you do want something that's full-size ATX, check out the ASRock B550 Phantom Gaming 4 AC. So we got Wi-Fi. The VRMs are just mediocre, but again, we're not going to put any big CPUs on this other than maybe a 5700X3D, which would be absolutely fine. Upgraded audio as well. In terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, not as good, but still pretty decent with 6 high-speed USB ports. I do want you to avoid B450 motherboards that are in disguise as B550s. This is the MSI B550 Gaming Gen 3. Gen 3 should give it away right there. This is a PCIe Gen 3 only motherboard. It's technically a B450. I don't know how they get away with this. Just avoid this motherboard. Let's jump in the best cheap B650 motherboard and best cheap B850 motherboard. Remember, there is no difference between B650 and B850. It's basically marketing. It's just marketing. They're using the exact same chipset chip. But I will say, as a result of changing the marketing, it's allowed companies like ASRock to introduce boards like this. So if you have a Ryzen 7600X, 7600, 7500F, those CPUs, 9600X, any of the cheaper CPUs out there, right now it's going for $109 after the rebate. That's because they just launched these. Those rebates will go away and it will go to $120. But the ASRock B850M-X Wi-Fi, pretty good little board. The VRMs on this board are not absolutely fantastic, but again, you could probably eventually put a 9800X3D on this. It's got basic audio on it. In terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, it's not fantastic, but it's serviceable for high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, two USB 2.0 rather. It's got BIOS flashback. It does have the Wi-Fi, which is through an M.2 key that's added in. It's got USB Type-C for the front panel header on your PC case. 2 thumbs up there. It's got 2 M.2s on it. Overall, it's not a bad motherboard. It looks nice with the black for $119. All right, moving over to the best budget AM5 motherboard. So this is the best budget B850 motherboard or best budget B650 motherboard. So what we're looking for here, we're going to spend somewhere in the realm of like $130 up to $150, but we don't want to overspend. These are all going to be micro ATX boards. We'll go through the mid-range ATX boards in just a second. I really like this board, the ASRock B650M Pro RS Wi-Fi. This has been one of my top recommendations. Right now, $139, sometimes gets down to $129. There's also a non-Wi-Fi version of it that's like $119. If you don't need the Wi-Fi, maybe pick this one up instead. I'll link both of them down in the video description. Check those out for the current pricing. It's got basic audio on it, but the VRMs are much stronger than the board we just looked at. I won't say much stronger, but strong enough that you can put a higher core count CPU on here and not really worry about it. The other thing I like about this board is it's got good rear panel USB connectivity to it. So it's got 4 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and then it's got 4 USB 2.0 ports on it. 2 thumbs up, 2.5 gigabit LAN. It comes with a built-in rear IO shield, which is always just kind of a nice touch. And it's got nice chunky heat sinks over the M.2 on it. And the Wi-Fi, of course, is provided by an M.2 E key on it. Overall, 140 bucks. This has kind of been my go-to recommendation for best budget board. Let's jump over to a board I'm super excited to show you, and I'm hoping this is not a one-off sale because this board used to sell for like $179, but I'm hoping that ASUS has come to its senses because the ASUS Tough Gaming B650M-E Wi-Fi would be a great competitor in this price class for $139. I think people would be super excited about it. And that's what it's on right now. Now, what is this board? It's not that different from the ASRock board I just showed you. In fact, it's got very similar features. Now, the ASRock board I showed you actually has 3 M.2s on it. This has 2. However, I will say this is a nice looking board. It's got great VRM heat sinks on it. It's got that ASUS Tough styling to it. All these boards have basic audio, which is absolutely fine. It's got a nice Wi-Fi antenna that comes with it as well. And I will say, in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, it's looking pretty sharp. It's got 4 high-speed USB ports and 4 lower-speed USB 2.0 ports. So that's 2 thumbs up right there. Again, built-in rear I/O shield. If this board maintains at like $139 or even $149 price point, I think this is a real great competitor. Here's another great board. However, I hate the price right now. It's gone up to $156. That's the MSI Pro B650M-A Wi-Fi. But I have often seen this board basically get down to that $139. I'm hoping this is just a temporary thing. Sometimes it sticks up here for a while. It's a great board. We've used this in a lot of builds, as we have with the ASRock board, and it's got great VRM heat sinks to it. Instead of the 3 M.2s, it has 2. However, the rear panel USB connectivity on this board, quite a bit better actually. It's got basically 8 high-speed USB ports. It kind of forgoes all those USB 2.0 ports instead of just high-speed ports. And it's got the Wi-Fi on it. It's got great VRMs on it. We've had a lot of great success with this board. We absolutely love it. $156 is a little steep though, MSI. Probably should come down to about like $149 at the most. All right, let's jump up to full-size ATX mid-range motherboard. So there's like the best B650 motherboard, best B850 motherboard in the mid-range. So what do I mean? Number one, these are still gonna have basic audio on them. That's absolutely fine, but these are full-size ATX board. Some of them are gonna have 3 M.2s, others are gonna have 2. They're all gonna have pretty good rear panel USB connectivity to them. Very good VRMs. You could put up to a 9800X3D on any of these boards, and I would feel probably pretty good about it. Certainly you could go with like a Ryzen 7600X, 9600X, those kinds of CPUs as well. Let's start off with what has been my top pick, the MSI B650 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. And right now with the promo code, it's $149. It often gets to $169. I would not buy it there, because there's massive price crunch going on right now because of all the B850 motherboards, the X870E motherboards that have been released. It's smashing the prices down of everything. So I feel like this board is not really viable anymore at $169. I'd buy it around $150 where it's at now. It's a great motherboard overall. It's got really good rear panel USB connectivity. Honestly, it's basically the full-size ATX version of the micro ATX MSI I just showed you that was one of our budget values. It's got great rear panel USB connectivity to it, 8 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C. Now, it doesn't come with a built-in rear I/O shield, which is kind of a missed opportunity there. The VRMs look great. The styling looks great on it. Again, 2 M.2s. Kind of just a lot to like about this board if you can pick it up for about $150. The challenge right now in the mid-range is that it's really around that $150 price point. There aren't a lot of good alternatives right now while we're waiting for prices to fall. Some of the other competitors like the ASUS Tough B650-E that had been a pretty good competitor there have gone out of stock right now. Maybe they'll come back into stock. In the meantime, the Gigabyte B650 Eagle AX, not a bad motherboard, 3 M.2s. Now, one of them is only half bandwidth on it. That's maybe a big deal to you, maybe it's not. Only one of them has the heat spreader on top of it. And it does have a built-in rear I/O shield, which I do like. They've gone in favor here in terms of the USB ports of just the fastest ports possible and fewer of them. So there's 3 super high-speed USB ports, and then you get a whole bunch of USB 2.0 ports. It's not my favorite configuration, but if you have a lot of kind of lower speed devices to plug in, maybe this is the one for you. I will say the Ethernet on the back, the networking, 1 gigabit per second. That really should have been 2.5 gigabit, but I know a lot of people, your internet isn't even that fast to begin with, so maybe that's enough for you. It does have Wi-Fi 6 on it. Overall, it's not a bad motherboard. The VRMs are actually fantastic on it, but for $154, this is pretty much the only option right now until other prices fall. Let's jump to those premium AM5 gaming motherboards. So this is like the best B650 motherboard for gaming, best B850 motherboard for gaming. And what do I mean when I say these are premium motherboards? Well, number one, we're talking about upgraded audio with an audio codec of either ALC 1200, 4080, or 1220, with those last two being the top end. At least 3 M.2 drives, all of them need to be full bandwidth, and with at least most of them having heat spreaders over the top of them. It's gonna have rock solid VRMs to be able to take any CPU, a built-in rear IO shield, and it's gonna look pretty amazing too. And it's got obviously has to have a lot of great USB connectivity to it. Let's look at the pricing here. The pricing starts at about $170 right now, as you can see with the first one we're gonna recommend here. Last year this was $200 at least. The one dividing line right now is the newer B850 motherboards and B650E that all have a PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot on these models, whereas the B650 motherboards are probably PCIe Gen 4 GPU slot. Now again, unless you plan to put an RTX 7090 on there 4 years from now, I don't think this is gonna be a big draw, but you can decide how important this is to you. The other feature differences between B850 and B650 are that the B850 generally all have Wi-Fi 7 instead of Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E on the B650 boards, and they also have the newer toolless building features, especially a lot of the ASUS, MSI, and Gigabyte models out there. Easy to remove SSD drives, easier to remove GPUs, things like that, that just make the building experience a little better. Our first recommendation here for value is the ASUS TUF Gaming B650 Plus. I love this board at $168, not $212 like it was last year. That's a massive price cut. 2 thumbs up. I hope it stays at this price because it will continue to be my top recommendation for the most premium value pick out there. This has Wi-Fi 6 on it. It's got upgraded ALC 1200 audio on it. Great looking audio section to it. All 3 of the M.2s are full bandwidth, and they have heat spreaders. It's got the really cool ASUS TUF kind of styling to it that a lot of people really like, and it's got super rock solid VRMs to it as well. PCIe Gen 4 on the main GPU slot. Again, I don't think that's a huge feature difference. If you do, check out one of the B850s I'm about to show you. And in terms of its rear panel USB connectivity, pretty decent here. 4 high-speed USB ports, including 2 Type-Cs, and then 4 lower-speed USB 2.0 ports for like your mice, your keyboards, things like that. 2.5 gigabit LAN, that's pretty standard to these. It's got the full suite of audio outs, except the optical, which I really wish they would bring back. Overall, great motherboard for $168, and while it stays at this price, it's gonna be my top pick. If you wanna spend just a little bit more money, the ASRock B850 Live Mixer Wi-Fi is amazing for $189. So because it's B850, you're gonna get that GPU PCIe 5.0 slot at the top there. Again, I don't think it's necessary, but if you do, there it is. All 3 of the M.2s on this have full heat shields on them. It's got ALC 1220 upgraded audio. Decent enough looking audio section, not as many capacitors as the TUF Gaming one there. And then if you just look at its other features, including its connectivity, it's got quite a bit of rear panel connectivity. So it has 6 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and then 4 additional USB 2.0 ports for like your mice, your keyboard, just kind of connectivity for days. This does have the optical out, doesn't have the other jacks, but I guess we're splitting the difference there. Wi-Fi 7 on this as well, if that's important to you. Remember, you do need a Wi-Fi 7 router to take advantage of Wi-Fi 7. Overall, this is a fantastic motherboard for $189. Other alternatives include the MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. Now, this had been my top pick last year when it was like $170. It's now back to $200. Hopefully this is just a blip and it goes back to that price, and I would definitely recommend it at that price. But there are better motherboards over $200 that are X870E, really good values with a lot more features that are like $10 more, as we'll go over in our extreme motherboards and creative motherboards next. But if this one does come back in price, I do like it. It's got really good VRMs on it. 3 M.2s, they're all full bandwidth. Only 2 of them have heat spreaders, a little bit of a missed opportunity there. MSI has upgraded ALC 4080 audio on it. Pretty good looking audio section to it. Board looks really sick too. It's all matte black. For those of you looking to do that kind of build out there, it looks really, really nice. 8 high-speed USB ports, including a Type-C, and then 2 additional USB 2.0 ports for like your mice, your keyboard, stuff like that. This does have Wi-Fi 6E on it, and it also has the full suite of rear panel audio connectors, which I really appreciate there. $199, a little hard to justify given the motherboards that are coming up, but if it gets back to that good price of like $170, pick it up. Let's just take a quick preview of the B850 motherboards, because the price is kind of stupid right now, but I do expect these prices to fall down rapidly right now. Let's start off with the ASUS TUF Gaming B850 Plus Wi-Fi. Again, wouldn't recommend it at $229, but closer, maybe $199 kind of price point. What would be the difference? Well, number one, PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot, kind of standard on this class of B850 motherboards, this price class. The big upgrade in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, it essentially just adds 4 more high-speed USB ports, which is always welcome. You get Wi-Fi 7, that's pretty standard among B850 motherboards, over the Wi-Fi 6 on the B650. And then the styling is pretty changed, right? So instead of that kind of blocky geometric, it's very black and white contrast. My personal preference is this one. I do like the other one as well, but to me, I love that black and white contrast. MSI Mag B850 Tomahawk. The differences here, again, some styling differences. They add a little bit of color to it as well. It's not just matte black. But otherwise, Wi-Fi 7, PCIe Gen 5.0, GPU slot, a little bit of change to the rear panel. They've actually reduced the total number of high-speed USB ports, but the ports themselves have added a Type-C, so the ports are a little faster overall. So those are the difference right now. Again, I would expect these to kind of hopefully get under that $199 price point soon. Let's jump into the best AM5 creator motherboards and the best AM5 extreme gaming motherboards. So if you got a little bit more money to spend, you want like something super premium, or you're a creator and you want tons of USB connections, tons of M.2s, these are boards to take a look at. Now, why are we looking at X670E here? Well, because X870E is the same chipset, and those have come in at stupidly high prices along with B850. Many of those are overpriced, and they're smashing down the X670E because people aren't buying these as much, even though it's the same chipset. It's just marketing, guys. It's just marketing. Get the best value for yourself out there. This is a fantastic motherboard. The Asus Prime X670E-Pro Wi-Fi, 4 M.2s. It's got upgraded ALC 1220 audio. Look at the audio section down here. It looks amazing. Plenty of shielding to it. All the M.2s have heat sinks over them. The VRMs are totally insane on this board. You want your rear panel USB connectivity? Look at that. 10 high-speed USB connections. 3 of them are Type-Cs. This is a fantastic motherboard, full suite of audio connectors as well. I absolutely love this board. It's only $209. Again, grab the best value for you out there. I think a lot of these X670E boards will go away. Another great value right now, the MSI Mag X670E Tomahawk. If you're looking for something more in a black instead of that kind of metallic or white, $219. I mean, MSI, how can you be selling the B650 for only 20 bucks less? Again, it's X670E, so you do get PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot to it. You get 4 M.2s. Now, not all of them have heat shields on this. I kind of wish they had done that. But again, the board looks amazing. It's got great styling to it. And in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, pretty good rear panel USB connectivity too. It's basically got 8 high-speed USB ports, including 2 Type-Cs. Not quite as good as the Asus board that we just looked at, but if you're more into this styling, take a look. Some alternatives out there, well, right now the Asus ROG Strix B650E-F gaming Wi-Fi, great motherboard, has top PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot. This is the board, by the way, that's sitting in the PC next to me. We basically run our entire recording studio out of it, at least on the recording side here. 3 M.2s, all of them have heat shields over them. And then we've got the fantastic ALC 1220 upgraded audio. Look at that audio section to it. In terms of rear USB connectivity, it has an absolute ton. It's got 2 USB Type-C ports, and then it has an additional 6 high-speed USB ports, and then 4 USB 2.0 ports. Just connect stuff for days. Wi-Fi 6E on it. Overall, I absolutely love this board. Personally, I know $239 is a little expensive, but I know some of you out there absolutely have to have Strix boards. This is a great one. Let's jump into the best all-white motherboard for Ryzen 7000 and 9000 series CPUs. We're just going to quickly go through the top offerings from each brand here because some of them are basically just reskinned versions of existing motherboards. Let's start with ASRock, the B850 Steel Legend Wi-Fi. Yes, I know there was a B650 Steel Legend Wi-Fi. That thing is never in stock. I can never find it. It is a great board though if you can pick it up. I'll link it down in the video description to check it out. In the meantime, if you want something that's actually available, the ASRock B850 Steel Legend, so PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot, 2 thumbs up there. It's very similar to the live mixer that I showed you. Differences include 1 additional M.2 drive on it, so that's great. And then it gets rid of 4 of the lower speed USB 2.0 ports on the back. Otherwise, very similar. Audio section on this one, not quite as impressive. While the audio codec is upgraded, it's only got 2 audio capacitors on it. Not a big fan of that, but otherwise, if you're looking for something around $200, it's a pretty good pickup. Gigabyte has like 9 million of these boards, the ICE boards. I'm going to go with the Gigabyte B850 Aorus Elite Wi-Fi 7 ICE because it looks like they may be phasing out the other ones other than the micro ATX ones. This is a good board for $228. However, no upgraded audio on these boards. I don't know why Gigabyte has completely abandoned upgrading their audio on any of their boards. It's all ALC 897, kind of entry-level codec on them. But if you don't need that and you want just tons of rear panel USB connectivity, look at all that. That's insane out there. And you want something that has white connectors on it. So look at those plastic connectors for like the 24-pin, the RAM DIMMs, everything. They're all white. They're not black connectors on them. This is a great pickup for $228, and it looks insane. MSI's got a version of the Tomahawk out there that's called the MSI MPG 850 Edge TI Wi-Fi. It's a real mouthful to say. MSI, you're killing me. It's basically the Tomahawk. Now, I will say they add one feature to it though, which is this postcode readout, which I think every motherboard from the mid-range and above should have. It's talk about the original easy building feature, all these easy building features that they're touting. There it is right there. Include postcodes. That's my postcode rant for this motherboard video. Otherwise, it's basically a Tomahawk B850, so it's got great features to it. It does not have white connectors, though. You're still dealing with the black connectors on the board. So if that's not something that you want, check out something else. NZXT obviously has other issues, like business issues. However, I want to include this board because I know some people just absolutely love it. This is the N7 B650E. I haven't seen that they're offering a B850 just yet. If they do, I'll list it down in the video description. It's basically a black motherboard. Now, these are made by ASRock with these white plating over it, and people like it because of the clean look to it. Got upgraded audio on it, ALC 1220, pretty good audio selection on it. Pretty decent in terms of the rear panel USB connectivity. Lots of kind of USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports on it, but not like super speed ports on it. But really, that's all most folks need. This guy has Wi-Fi 6E on it for $273. And then we got ASUS ROG Strix B850-A Gaming. And yes, this is, I believe, their first motherboard on white PCB in a very long time, at least, maybe ever. We'll have to double check on that. $269, little steep on the pricing as with all the B850 boards right now. Hopefully over time this will come down. Basically, very, very good feature set on it. Most of the changes here are towards the rear panel. You do get some additional USB ports over the current B650-A, and the B650-A Strix also is not on white PCB, which is really nice. It still does have like the black connectors to it, so if you're looking for the white connectors, it's really the Gigabyte board. But otherwise, if you're looking tons of features, this is a good pickup. For those of you looking for back of the motherboard connector, so you want to do a cableless PC build, there's really only Project Zero right now, but we are expecting both ASUS and Gigabyte to release new motherboards with back of the motherboard connector, and MSI is going to refresh their lineup later this year, but that's like second half possibly of 2025. Maybe some of those boards will come out a little earlier. In the meantime, if you want to do a cableless build, you can still pick up the B650 Project Zero AM5 motherboard. Now, this is $209. I will say it's basically kind of a mid-range motherboard. It doesn't have upgraded audio or anything like that. What you're paying for here is basically to put the cables on the back of the motherboard, which, hey, I mean, that's what you're paying for, right? That's what you want. In terms of rear panel USB connectivity, not bad on it in terms of it's got 4, 5, 6, 7 high-speed USB ports, 2 Type-Cs on them, and then it's got the 2 USB 2.0 ports as well. It's got Wi-Fi 6E. It's a pretty decent motherboard, looks nice, 2 M.2 slots on it for, $200. Let's quickly go through the best mini ITX motherboard for Ryzen 7000 and 9000 series CPU, so on the AM5 platform. Honestly, a lot of them do the same thing, and they're all priced around $300. That's why I do like the Gigabyte B650i. It allows you to have 3 M.2s on them, where the other ones are either 1 or 2 on some of them. And it's a great board. We did our last mini ITX build using this motherboard. It does have a little daughter board that you attach to the side here. Some people didn't like that. I know I read in the comments. We had no problem with it and looked just fine. Again, you're generally not going to be looking at the motherboard anyway, so it's not that big a deal to me. VRMs are great, upgraded audio on it. In terms of the rear panel USB connectivity, decent enough on it. Again, you're never going to get that much on a mini ITX motherboard, but it has 5 high-speed USB ports, a Type-C on it. It has 2 USB 2.0 ports as well. It's Wi-Fi 6. If you want to get maybe a more upgraded version of this, there is the B850 version of this that just came out. It drops an M.2 support on it. Doesn't have quite as much rear panel USB connectivity, but it does have that PCIe Gen 5 GPU slot on it, so maybe that's something you want to check out. I'd probably just go with the cheaper one. Remember, all of our links for Best Ryzen Motherboard 2025 recommendations are listed down in the video description. Check those links out for current pricing and availability in your region. And if you got value out of this video, please give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel, and subscribe for more cool PC content. And we'll catch you on the next one.